The Deathworld Council studied human biology, then screamed, in terror, as Captain Jonah Rourke survived the null chamber's impossible radiation, his body glowing with unearthly blue light. Their ultimate weapon backfired spectacularly, walking unharmed through shattered barriers. He revealed humanity's terrible truth. They weren't studying him. He was studying them. The predator had become the prey. The grand spire of the Deathworld Council pierced the perpetually violet sky of Zyre 9, its jagged silhouette a monument to scientific authority in the Galactic Confederation. Unlike the sleek, curved architecture favored by most advanced civilizations, the Council headquarters embraced the harsh angles and imposing presence that mirrored the deadly worlds they studied. Every surface within the spire glowed with carefully cultivated bioluminescent fungi, casting an eerie blue-green light that eliminated the need for artificial illumination. Dr. Solara Vex strode through the central corridor, her six-fingered hands clasped behind her back, chin tilted upward in the posture of supreme confidence that had become her trademark. The walls surrounding her were transparent in sections, revealing the complex network of transit tubes that carried specimens from Class 12 Deathworlds throughout the facility. Creatures that could survive crushing pressure, acid atmospheres, and radiation levels that would liquefy most sentient life forms move through the system like blood cells through arteries. Chief Xenobiologist, a junior researcher, greeted her with the traditional three-finger salute. The Consul awaits you in Chamber Alpha. Solara acknowledged the greeting with the barest nod. Her reputation preceded her wherever she went within the spire. After all, she was the first xenobiologist to successfully dissect the silicon-based predators of Vesuvius Prime while they remained partially alive, a feat that had earned her the coveted Platinum Scalpel Award 3 cycles ago. Her private laboratory was the envy of every researcher in the Confederation. Glass vats of hyperacidic fluids that could dissolve virtually any organic matter. Autopsy tables etched with ancient runes of dominion that helped contain the death throes of particularly violent specimens. "Has the lieutenant prepared the briefing?" Solara asked, her voice clipped and efficient. "Lieutenant Kalen has assembled all available data on the specimen, Chief," the junior researcher confirmed, scurrying to keep pace with Solara's long strides. Lieutenant Mira Kalen was waiting outside Chamber Alpha, her slender frame tense with anticipation. The junior assistant's emerald skin had a grayish undertone today, a sign of stress among her species. Solara noted this with clinical detachment. She knew the lieutenant's history, survivor of Hadrax IV, a once thriving colony world that had collapsed under sudden, unexplained radioactive storms. The trauma made Mira excessively thorough in her work, which Solara appreciated, even if the lieutenant's tendency toward ethical hand-wringing was occasionally tiresome. "Chief Xenobiologist," Mira greeted her. "I've prepared the preliminary scans as requested. There are anomalies." Solara raised an eyebrow ridge. "Anomalies are why we exist. Lieutenant, specifics?" Mira handed over a data crystal. "The specimen appears to lack many of the adaptations we would expect from a Class 12 Deathworld inhabitant. And yet, according to the retrieval team's report, this world, Earth, exhibits extreme environmental variation, tectonic instability, and irregular radiation belts." "Fascinating," Solara murmured, slotting the crystal into her personal scanner. "A paradox. Then, a species that survives a death world without the expected biological advantages." Her 4 eyes narrowed in concentration as she scrolled through the data. "This will be illuminating." The massive doors to Chamber Alpha slid open, revealing the circular council chamber beyond. 12 seats rose in concentric rings around a central platform, each occupied by a representative of the Confederation's most scientifically advanced species. At the highest position sat Consul Ralthus, the reptilian elder, whose obsession with cataloging Deathworld biologies had led to the formation of the Council centuries ago. His scales had faded from their once vibrant crimson to a dull rust color, but his yellow eyes remained sharp with intelligence. "Dr. Vex," Ralphus called, his voice carrying the slight hiss characteristic of his species. "We have waited long enough. Present your initial assessment." Solara moved to the central platform, feeling the familiar weight of authority settle upon her shoulders. This was her domain, the analysis of life that evolved in conditions that most civilized beings would consider impossible. She activated the holographic display with a gesture. "Esteemed Consul, honored representatives," she began. "Before us lies an unprecedented opportunity. The specimen designated human comes from a previously unclassified Deathworld in Sector 8. Initial readings suggest a carbon-based life form with bilateral symmetry and endoskeletal structure, superficially similar to many Class 3 species." A murmur of disappointment rippled through the chamber. Solara raised a hand for silence. "However," she continued, "what makes this specimen remarkable is not its apparent simplicity, but rather the environmental conditions it has evolved to survive. The planet Earth experiences temperature variations from -40 to +50 degrees Celsius. Its atmospheric composition includes oxygen at levels that would be toxic to 17% of Confederation species. Surface gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared, nearly double that of our standard habitable range." Consul Ralphus leaned forward, his interest visibly piqued. "You suggest this human is more resilient than appearances indicate?" "Precisely, Consul. Our preliminary tissue analysis shows cellular structures that appear ordinary, yet must function under extraordinary stress. I propose a comprehensive examination protocol to determine exactly how this species has adapted to such hostile conditions." Lieutenant Mira stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. "If I may, Consul, the specimen was captured during an exploratory mission. The humans have achieved interstellar travel, suggesting technological sophistication alongside biological resilience." Ralphus waved a dismissive claw. "Technology is merely a crutch for biological inadequacy. Lieutenant, Dr. Vex, you have my authorization to proceed with all necessary examinations. The Council requires a complete biological profile." "There is one more thing, Consul," Solara added. "The retrieval team reports that standard sedation protocols were insufficient. The specimen remains conscious despite administration of Class 5 neural suppressants." This revelation sent a ripple of genuine surprise through the Council chamber. Class 5 suppressants could render even the monstrous apex predators of Kronos Beta comatose within seconds. "Interesting," Ralphus hissed. "Most interesting. Perhaps we should meet this resilient creature before we proceed to dissection." A signal from Ralphus activated the chamber's central containment field. From below the floor, a transparent cylinder rose, containing a single figure. Captain Jonah Rourke stood perfectly still within his prison, his posture military straight, despite the visible wounds from his capture. He was secured with reinforced biosteel shackles. Yet there was nothing in his demeanor that suggested defeat. His eyes, a startling blue against his tan skin, scanned the chamber methodically, taking in each council member before settling on Solara with unnerving intensity. "So," he said, his voice somehow carrying clearly through the containment field, "you're the welcoming committee." Solara was momentarily taken aback by the specimen's casual speech. Translation implants rendered his words perfectly comprehensible, which meant the human had somehow absorbed the standard linguistic package, despite being unconscious during the implantation procedure. "Specimen," she addressed him, "you will be subject to a series of examinations to determine the full extent of your species' biological capabilities. Cooperation will make the process less traumatic." Jonah flexed his arms casually against the shackles. "You know, where I come from, kidnapping someone and calling them a specimen is considered pretty rude." Lieutenant Mira's monitoring equipment suddenly chimed an alert. She glanced down at her readings with a puzzled expression. Chief Xenobiologist, the human's vital signs are unusual. Explain, Solara demanded. His heart rate and respiratory function remain completely steady. There's no physiological stress response despite the situation. Mira looked up, meeting Solara's gaze with concern. Either their species lacks a fear response, or this specimen is exceptionally well trained, Solara finished, turning her attention back to the human. Fascinating. As if to test this theory, she activated a small dispenser in the containment field. A single drop of corrosive acid, mild by the Council's standards, but sufficient to cause extreme pain in most species, fell onto Jonah's exposed forearm. The human glanced down at the sizzling droplet, then back up at Solara. His expression hadn't changed. Is that the best you've got? I've had coffee that burned worse. Mira's monitoring equipment chimed again. No change in vital signs. Chief, the pain receptor's activated, but there's no corresponding stress response in the central nervous system. For the first time in her distinguished career, Solara felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, a cold sensation in her core that might, in lesser beings, be identified as fear. If even a single human cell could resist their standard protocols, what else might this species be capable of? Consul Ralthus slithered down from his elevated position to inspect the human more closely. Remove it to the primary laboratory, he ordered. Dr. Vex, you will begin a full biological assessment immediately. I want to know everything. Bone density, organ function, neural pathways. If this creature has secrets, you will extract them. As the containment field receded into the floor, taking Jonah with it, Solara caught a final glimpse of the human's face. He was smiling, a baring of teeth that, in most species, would signal aggression. But there was something else in his expression, something that sent another unfamiliar chill through Solara's professional detachment. Recognition. As if the human knew exactly what was coming and wasn't concerned in the slightest. Lieutenant, Solara said quietly, as they followed the transport tube to the laboratory level. Increase security protocols to maximum. I suspect our new specimen may be more challenging than anticipated. Mira nodded, but her expression remained troubled. Chief, I've been reviewing the retrieval team's logs. The human didn't resist capture, even though the team reported he had numerous opportunities to escape. Your point, Lieutenant. What if he wanted to be captured? Mira's voice dropped to a whisper. What if we're not the ones conducting the experiment? Solara dismissed the notion with a sharp gesture. Paranoia is unbecoming of a scientist. Lieutenant, prepare the primary extraction suite. We begin immediately. Yet, as they entered the sterile confines of her laboratory, that cold sensation lingered in Solara's core. For the first time since she'd joined the Deathworld Council, she found herself second-guessing the wisdom of their standard procedures. If even a single human cell resisted their tests, what would that mean for the Council's understanding of life itself? The primary extraction suite was Solara's pride and joy, a triumph of xenobiological engineering. Designed to accommodate specimens from any known environment, its walls could withstand temperatures from absolute zero to the surface heat of a blue giant star. The central examination platform adjusted automatically to counteract any known biological defense mechanism, from acid sprays to electromagnetic pulses. Captain Jonah Rourke lay strapped to this platform now, his biosteel restraints anchored directly to the room's substructure. Despite the circumstances, his expression remained calm, almost bored, as laboratory assistants attached sensor pads to his exposed skin. I must admit, Solara said as she calibrated her instruments, your composure is remarkable for a species with your apparently limited evolutionary advantages. Jonah's laugh startled her. It was a sound of genuine amusement, not the stress response she might have expected. Limited advantages? He repeated. Lady, you have no idea what humans are capable of. I intend to find out, Solara replied coolly. She nodded to her assistants, who activated the first sequence of tests. The initial phase was simple. Tissue samples extracted from various external sites, blood drawn for analysis, non-invasive scans of major organ systems. Standard procedure for any new specimen. What wasn't standard was the human's response, or rather, lack thereof. Chief Xenobiologist, one assistant called. The dermal samples are regenerating. Solara moved to examine the petri dish containing skin cells taken from the human's arm. Under the microscope, the cells were already multiplying at an accelerated rate, the wound on Jonah's arm visibly smaller than it had been moments before. Accelerated healing, she noted. Impressive, but not unprecedented. Increased to Level 2 examination. Level 2 involved testing the specimen's resistance to various environmental stressors. Heat, cold, pressure, radiation. As each test began, Solara watched Jonah's reactions carefully. The temperature in his containment field dropped to -70 degrees Celsius. Most species would show immediate signs of distress. Jonah simply closed his eyes, his breathing slowing slightly. Fascinating, Solara murmured. Hibernation response? Nah, Jonah replied, opening his eyes again. Just something we call the Wim Hof method. Any human can learn it. Any human? Solara couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Sure. We've got people who swim in ice water for fun. He shrugged, as much as the restraints would allow. This is chilly, but I've been through worse winter camping trips. Before Solara could respond, Lieutenant Mira approached with a data pad. Chief, the blood analysis results are concerning. Solara scanned the results, her 4 eyes widening slightly as she processed the information. The human's blood contained remarkable oxygen-binding capabilities, a complex immune system unlike anything in their database, and cellular structures that seemed designed to adapt to almost any environmental challenge. This can't be correct, she muttered. Run the analysis again. Already did, Mira confirmed. 3 times. Solara returned her attention to Jonah, seeing him with new eyes. Your species evolved on a single planet. No genetic engineering. All natural, Jonah replied with that same unsettling smile. Earth throws a lot at you. We adapt. Proceed to Level 3, Solara ordered. Lieutenant Mira hesitated. Chief, perhaps we should consult with the Council before. The Council authorized a complete examination. Lieutenant, Level 3. The laboratory assistants exchanged glances, but complied. Level 3 examination involved direct stress testing of the specimen's physical capabilities. The restraints on Jonah's right arm reconfigured, allowing limited movement while sensors measured his strength, reflexes, and endurance. We will now test your species' resistance to physical trauma, Solara explained. This may be uncomfortable. Jonah flexed his freed arm, rolling his shoulder. Do your worst. The first test was a simple pressure application, steadily increasing force applied to the limb until the subject indicated maximum tolerance. Most species reach their limit at forces well below the breaking point of their skeletal structures. The pressure increased, 100 kilograms, 200, 300. Jonah's expression remained unchanged. Is it working yet? He asked casually. The machine registered 500 kilograms of pressure, enough to shatter most endoskeletal structures. And still, the human showed no signs of distress. Impossible, one of the assistants murmured. Solara adjusted the settings. Activate the ultrasonics. A high-frequency vibration designed to create microfractures in bone structure began to pulse through the testing apparatus. It was a method that had proven effective even on the silicon-based lifeforms of Vesuvius Prime. The machine suddenly emitted a sharp crack, but it wasn't the human's bones that had failed. The testing apparatus itself had fractured along a stress line. Jonah flexed his fingers, completely unharmed. Sorry about your machine. For the first time in her career, Solara found herself speechless. She turned away, gesturing for Lieutenant Mira to follow her to a private consultation area. "This cannot be correct," she insisted, once they were alone. "No carbon-based life form should be able to withstand those stressors without specialized adaptations, which we are not seeing in the scans." Mira's expression was troubled. "What if our scans aren't detecting the adaptations? What if human biology operates on principles we haven't encountered before?" "That's absurd," Solara snapped. "Biology follows universal constants. If their bones are stronger than our instruments can damage, we should see structural differences." "Unless," Mira suggested hesitantly, "the difference isn't in the structure, but in something more fundamental, something we don't know to look for." Solara's professional pride rebelled against the suggestion, but her scientific curiosity was aroused. "Prepare the specimen for molecular analysis. I want to see his DNA, protein structures, everything down to the quantum level if necessary." As they returned to the main laboratory, they found a commotion in progress. One of the guards, Thrax, was clutching his arm, green blood seeping between his fingers. Two more guards had their weapons trained on Jonah, who remained strapped to the examination platform, now with both arms securely restrained again. "What happened?" Solara demanded. "The specimen moved faster than anticipated," one guard reported. "When the restraint was being reapplied, it struck Guardsman Thrax. He grabbed my throat," Jonah corrected calmly. "I don't like being choked. Reflex action. Sorry about that." Thrax growled, displaying rows of serrated teeth. "The human strike was unusually powerful. It penetrated my dermal armor." This was another impossibility. Thrax's species evolved on a heavy gravity world. Their dermal armor could stop projectile weapons. For a supposedly soft human to penetrate it with a bare-handed strike. "Take Guardsman Thrax to medical," Solara ordered, "and summon additional security. Level 4 restraints for the specimen." As the injured guard was led away, Lieutenant Mira leaned closer to Solara. "Chief, I've been reviewing the retrieval team's footage. The human's world, Earth, has environmental conditions that change rapidly and dramatically. Their historical records show they've survived multiple extinction-level events." "Natural selection," Solara mused. "The ultimate crucible." "There's more," Mira continued. "Their bodies contain trillions of microorganisms that live symbiotically within them. They're not just a species, they're an entire ecosystem." Solara's scientific mind raced with the implications. That could explain the adaptability, not specialized evolution, but collaborative survival. She approached Jonah again, studying him with new intensity. "Your species interests me, human. You lack the obvious adaptations we see in other Deathworld inhabitants. No armor, no redundant organs, no specialized appendages. Yet you demonstrate remarkable resilience." "We're full of surprises," Jonah replied. "Maybe you should just ask me about humans instead of poking and prodding. I give a mean PowerPoint presentation." "The Council does not negotiate with specimens," Solara stated flatly. "But rest assured, we will understand your biology completely before we're finished." As she turned away, Archivist Cedrin, a slight, pale creature responsible for documenting all Council proceedings, approached with a data crystal. "Chief Xenobiologist," the Archivist whispered. "I've been instructed to inform you that footage of the preliminary tests has been shared with the security wing. There is concern." "Concern?" Solara echoed. "About the humans' capabilities. Some Council factions are suggesting a more terminal approach to the examination." Solara bristled. "That would be scientifically irresponsible. We've barely begun to understand this species." "Nevertheless," Cedrin continued, "a formal vote has been called. The Council will convene in 1 hour to determine how to proceed." After the Archivist departed, Lieutenant Mira approached Solara again. "Chief, while we prepare for the Council meeting, may I continue some non-invasive observations? There are several anomalies in the biometric readings I'd like to investigate further. Solara nodded absently, her mind already focused on the arguments she would present to the council. Proceed, Lieutenant, but no changes to the established protocol without my authorization. As Solara left to prepare her presentation, Mira remained in the laboratory, ostensibly reviewing data on her pad. Once the other assistants were occupied with their own tasks, she approached Jonah's examination platform. "Your recovery rate is remarkable," she said quietly, indicating the now-healed puncture where blood samples had been drawn. "Our analysis shows your cells utilize oxygen with extraordinary efficiency." Jonah studied her with those unnervingly perceptive blue eyes. "You're different from the others," he observed. "Less zealous." Mira glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I studied xenobiology to understand life, not to dissect it into submission. Some on the council have forgotten that distinction." "Let me guess," Jonah said. "You're wondering if the ethical standards you apply to evolved species should extend to humans too." Mira's emerald skin flushed a deeper green with surprise. "How did you know what you're thinking?" Jonah finished. "Humans are good at reading body language. Really good. It's how we survived predators that were stronger and faster than us. We learned to predict behavior." This simple explanation sent a chill through Mira. If humans could intuitively understand alien psychology just by observation, what other capabilities might they possess that the Council was overlooking? "The Council is voting on your fate," she told him. "Some want to escalate to terminal experimentation." Jonah's expression didn't change. "And you're telling me this because—" "Because it's wrong," Mira said simply. "Your species has achieved interstellar travel. You're clearly sentient, with a complex civilization. You should be approached as a potential ally, not a laboratory specimen." "I appreciate the sentiment," Jonah replied. "But I don't think your boss shares your ethical concerns. Dr. Vex is brilliant, but single-minded. She's dedicated her life to understanding how life adapts to impossible conditions. And I'm the ultimate puzzle," Jonah concluded. "A species that survives a death world without obvious advantages." He shifted slightly in his restraints. "These are starting to chafe, by the way." Mira hesitated, then adjusted the restraint slightly to reduce pressure on his wrists. "That's all I can do without authorization. I'm sorry." "It's a start," Jonah said, that unsettling smile returning. "Sometimes that's all you need." 1 hour later, the full Deathworld Council had assembled in the Grand Chamber. The 12 representatives sat in their elevated positions, with Consul Ralthus presiding from the highest point. Captain Jonah Rourke had been brought before them, now restrained by Level 4 containment, a floating force field that surrounded him completely, preventing any physical contact with the environment. Dr. Solara Vex stood at the presentation podium, her posture rigid with determination. "Esteemed council members, I understand there are concerns about the human specimen's capabilities. However, I must emphasize the unprecedented scientific opportunity before us. This species represents an evolutionary approach we have never encountered, resilience without specialization." "The specimen injured a guard," one council member interjected. "A Chronos-born warrior with triple-density dermal plating." "A defensive reaction," Solara countered. "One that demonstrates exactly why this species deserves our complete attention. Instead of evolving physical armor, they develop speed, strength, and tactical thinking that compensates for their vulnerability." Consul Ralthus raised a claw for silence. "Dr. Vex, your preliminary findings are disturbing. This human shows resistance to our standard examination protocols that exceeds logical explanation. The security wing has expressed concern that continued study may pose risks to the facility." "With respect, Consul, fear has no place in scientific inquiry," Solara responded. "I propose transferring the specimen to the Bioforge for the next phase of examination." A murmur ran through the council. The bioforge was reserved for the most dangerous specimens, a chamber designed to test resistance to biological and chemical agents too hazardous for the standard laboratories. Lieutenant Mira, standing at Solara's side, stiffened visibly. "Chief," she whispered, "the bioforge protocols include nanoplague viruses, lethal to 98% of known species." "Which makes it the perfect test environment," Solara replied, without turning. "If humans have survived their Deathworld through some form of universal biological adaptation, the bioforge will reveal it." Ralthus considered the proposal, his yellow eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "The potential knowledge gain is substantial," he acknowledged. "However, containment must be absolute. If this human does possess extraordinary biological defenses, we must ensure they cannot be turned against us. I assure you, Consul, the bioforge is designed to contain even theoretical extremophiles from black hole event horizons. One human will pose no containment risk." Throughout this discussion, Jonah had remained silent, floating in his containment field with an expression of mild interest, as if he were observing an academic debate rather than a discussion of his impending torture. Finally, Ralthus nodded. "The Council votes on Dr. Vex's proposal to transfer the human specimen to the bioforge for advanced biological testing." One by one, the Council members registered their votes. Despite the security wing's concerns, scientific curiosity prevailed. The final tally, 9 in favor, 3 opposed. "The motion carries," Ralthus announced. "Dr. Vex, you may proceed with bioforge protocols. But be warned, at the first sign of containment risk, the security wing is authorized to implement terminal measures." As the containment field carrying Jonah was directed toward the lower levels where the bioforge waited, Lieutenant Mira fell into step beside Dr. Solara. "Chief, I must register a formal objection," she said, her voice low but firm. "The bioforge protocols were designed for non-sentient extremophiles. Using them on a sentient being constitutes—" "Your objection is noted, Lieutenant," Solara cut her off. "But may I remind you that your home world, Hadrax Fru, might still exist if we had better understood the biological mechanisms behind rapid adaptation to radiation?" Mira flinched as if struck. "That's not fair." "Science isn't about fairness, Lieutenant. It's about knowledge that saves lives." Solara's 4 eyes focused intently on Jonah's floating containment field ahead of them. "If humans have evolved universal adaptive capabilities, that knowledge could revolutionize our understanding of life itself." Mira fell silent, but her troubled expression spoke volumes. As they descended toward the bioforge level, she trailed slightly behind, her datapad clutched to her chest like a shield. The bioforge was the most secure facility in the entire Deathworld Council spire. Located deep beneath the mountain, its walls were composed of molecularly bonded neutronium, capable of containing even theoretical planet-killer microbes. At its center stood a transparent chamber, surrounded by an array of dispensers capable of introducing any known toxin, pathogen, or environmental stressor. Captain Jonah Rourke was transferred to this central chamber, his Level 4 restraints reconfigured to allow limited movement, while ensuring he couldn't touch the chamber walls. Around him, a team of specialists in hermetically sealed protective suits monitored banks of equipment. "Begin with Sequence Alpha," Solara ordered from the observation booth that overlooked the chamber. "Standard progression, increasing intensity." The first test introduced an airborne toxin, a simple compound that attacked respiratory systems by bonding with oxygen-carrying molecules. It was lethal to most oxygen-breathing species within seconds. Jonah coughed once, then took a deep breath. "Smells like New Jersey," he commented. The monitoring team exchanged glances. "No effect," Chief Xenobiologist 1 reported. "Respiratory function normal. Proceed to beta sequence." The second test involved a contact neurotoxin that could penetrate standard dermal layers and attack the central nervous system. A fine mist descended on Jonah, coating his exposed skin. He wiped some of the droplets from his face, examining the liquid on his fingers with mild interest. "Tingly," he observed. "No neurological impact detected," the monitoring team reported. "Subject's neural patterns remain stable." Solara leaned forward, her scientific fascination overwhelming her earlier misgivings. Gamma sequence. This test was more severe, a rapidly reproducing bacterial colony that consumed organic matter at an accelerated rate. The bacteria were introduced through small ports in the floor of Jonah's chamber. To everyone's shock, the bacterial colony spread across the floor, approached Jonah's feet, and then stopped, forming a perfect circle around him as if repelled by an invisible barrier. "What's happening?" Solara demanded. "Unknown, Chief," one specialist responded. "The bacteria appear to be dying when they approach the subject." Jonah looked down at the retreating bacterial mass. "My immune system's pretty good," he said conversationally. "We evolved alongside some nasty bugs back home." Solara's scientific mind raced. "His microbiome," she murmured. Lieutenant Mira mentioned it. Humans carry trillions of microorganisms that live symbiotically within them. They must be producing compounds that neutralize the test bacteria. "Should we proceed to Delta sequence?" the lead specialist asked. Delta sequence was rarely used, a nanoplague virus designed to attack and rewrite genetic material at the cellular level. It had been developed as a theoretical exercise, a universal adapter that could potentially allow Confederation species to survive on Deathworlds without generations of selective breeding. Solara hesitated for the first time. If the human could resist even this. "Proceed," she ordered. Lieutenant Mira, who had been silently observing from the back of the control room, stepped forward. "Chief, Delta sequence has never been tested on a sentient being. The potential suffering is necessary for scientific advancement," Solara completed firmly. "Proceed with Delta sequence." The specialist activated the final protocol. Unlike the previous tests, this one was invisible to the naked eye. Nanoscopic machines that entered through all available membranes, seeking to rewrite genetic code from within. For the first time, Jonah showed a reaction. He doubled over, coughing violently. The monitoring equipment registered spikes in his vital signs: elevated heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory distress. "Effect confirmed," the specialist announced. "Nanites are penetrating cellular membranes and beginning genetic restructuring." Solara felt a surge of vindication. Even humans had their limits. "Maintain observation. I want to see how long the specimen resists before full genetic conversion." But then, something unexpected happened. Jonah's coughing fit intensified, becoming racking spasms that shook his entire body. With a final, explosive cough, a cloud of fine mist erupted from his mouth, directly toward the transparent wall of his containment chamber. Alarms immediately blared throughout the bioforge. "Containment breach!" the specialist shouted. "The subject is expelling the nanites." "Impossible," Solara breathed. "The nanites are programmed to bond irreversibly with organic tissue." On the monitoring screens, microscopic images showed the truth. The nanites were being systematically dismantled by the human's immune system, broken down into component molecules and expelled from his body. Jonah straightened, wiping his mouth. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice hoarse but strong. "Felt like a bad case of the flu for a minute there." Solara stared in disbelief. Her most advanced tool, the pinnacle of Confederation bioengineering, had been defeated by this seemingly ordinary being. For the first time in her career, she felt a profound sense of scientific inadequacy, and with it, a creeping fear. If humans could adapt to and overcome the nanites, what else might they be capable of? And more disturbing still, what if they decided the Confederation itself was a threat to be neutralized? While Solara grappled with these unsettling thoughts, Lieutenant Mira had slipped away from the observation booth. Using her security clearance, she accessed a remote terminal connected to the Council's main archives. What she found there only deepened her concerns. Earth was not just any Deathworld. It was uniquely resilient, even among Class 12 planets. Its history included multiple mass extinction events, radical climate shifts, and even self-inflicted catastrophes like nuclear war, pandemics, and environmental collapse. Yet somehow, life had persisted, adapted, survived. And humans had not merely survived. They had thrived in the aftermath of each disaster, emerging stronger and more adaptable than before. As Mira scrolled through these records, a message notification appeared on her terminal, an automated alert from the security wing. The Council had convened an emergency session without Dr. Solara's knowledge. Their decision: transfer the human specimen to the null chamber for final, terminal experimentation. The null chamber. Even among the Deathworld Council's array of testing facilities, it was spoken of only in whispers. A place where the laws of physics themselves could be manipulated. Zero gravity combined with lethal radiation. Temperature extremes beyond anything found in nature. Pressure differentials that could compress carbon into diamond or expand it into vapor in microseconds. Nothing survived the null chamber. That was its purpose, to define the absolute limits of biological existence. With trembling hands, Mira copied the relevant files to her personal data crystal, then hurried back toward the bioforge. She had to warn Dr. Solara, not for the human's sake, but for the Council's. Something about this situation felt wrong, dangerously wrong, as if they were all participants in an experiment whose parameters they didn't understand. By the time she returned, preparations were already underway to transfer Jonah to the null chamber. His containment field had been reinforced with additional energy barriers, and a squadron of security wing guards surrounded him, weapons drawn. "Dr. Solara," Mira called, pushing her way through the crowd of technicians. "I need to speak with you urgently." Solara turned, her expression remote. "Not now, Lieutenant. The Council has ordered the final phase of examination." "That's what I need to discuss," Mira insisted. "I've been reviewing the archival data on Earth. This planet has survived catastrophes that would have sterilized most Deathworlds. And the humans, they don't just endure these events. They adapt to them on timescales that defy evolutionary theory." "All the more reason to understand their biology completely," Solara replied. "But what if we're approaching this wrong?" Mira lowered her voice. "What if their adaptation isn't purely biological? What if it's intentional?" Solara frowned. "Explain." "Their historical records show repeated patterns. Crisis, adaptation, advancement. It's as if catastrophe itself drives their development." Mira glanced at Jonah, who appeared to be listening to their conversation with interest despite the distance. "What if everything we've done so far has been making him stronger?" For a moment, Solara seemed to consider this perspective. Then, her professional pride reasserted itself. "Absurd. No species can consciously direct its own evolution, especially not on a cellular level. The null chamber will provide definitive answers." The procession began moving toward the deepest level of the Council spire, where the null chamber waited. Jonah floated in his containment field at the center of the formation, surrounded by armed guards, followed by Dr. Solara, Lieutenant Mira, and a team of specialized technicians. As they descended, the architecture changed subtly. The bioluminescent fungi that illuminated the upper levels gave way to a cold, artificial light. The walls thickened, reinforced with layers of exotic materials designed to contain forces that could, theoretically, tear apart the fabric of reality itself. The null chamber occupied an isolated section of the lowest level, separated from the rest of the facility by a series of airlocks and energy barriers. At its heart stood a perfectly spherical room. its walls composed of a material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Final containment protocols engaged," announced the lead technician, as Jonah's field was transferred to the chamber's central suspension mechanism. "All non-essential personnel must evacuate to safe distance." Lieutenant Mira hesitated, looking to Dr. Solara. "Chief, I formally request to remain as an observer." Solara studied her assistant with narrowed eyes. "Your concern for the specimen is noted, Lieutenant. However, this is now a security wing operation. We are here merely as scientific consultants." The commander of the security wing squadron, a massive reptilian creature with obsidian scales, stepped forward. "The null chamber will begin with zero gravity combined with level 10 radiation exposure. If the specimen survives, we will progress through the established extinction protocols until termination is achieved." "And if your extinction protocols fail?" Mira asked quietly. The commander's lipless mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "Nothing survives the null chamber, Lieutenant. Nothing." As the final preparations were completed, most personnel retreated to the observation room, a heavily shielded chamber separated from the null chamber by multiple layers of protection. Only Dr. Solara, as chief scientific observer, was permitted to remain in the adjacent control room, where she could monitor the tests directly. From within his containment field, Jonah watched these proceedings with the same unnervingly calm expression he had maintained throughout his captivity. When the security wing commander approached for a final inspection of the restraints, Jonah actually nodded to him, as if acknowledging a worthy opponent. "Any last words, specimen?" the commander asked, his voice thick with contempt. Jonah's eyes, those piercing blue eyes that seemed to see more than they should, flicked to the canteen attached to the commander's belt. "Mind if I get a drink of water before we start? It's been a long day." The request was so unexpected, so mundane, that it momentarily confused the commander. He glanced at Dr. Solara, who gave a curt nod. Scientific protocol dictated baseline measurements of all biological functions, including hydration status. With obvious reluctance, the commander unclipped his canteen and, using a mechanical arm extension to maintain safe distance, offered it to Jonah. The containment field created a small opening, just large enough to pass the container through. Jonah accepted the canteen with a nod of thanks, took a long drink, then handed it back. "Appreciate it," he said simply. The commander retreated, and the final sequence began. The control room sealed itself, the observation room shields locked into place, and the null chamber's interior mechanisms hummed to life. "Commencing zero gravity field," announced a technician's voice over the communication system. Inside the chamber, Jonah's containment field dissolved as the room's own environmental controls took over. His body rose slightly, floating in the center of the sphere as gravity ceased to exist. "Initiating radiation sequence," came the next announcement. "Level 10. Deadly energy began to pour into the chamber, radiation at levels that would reduce most organic matter to its component molecules within seconds. On the monitoring screens, radiation sensors climbed rapidly, soon exceeding their design parameters. Sensors overloading," a technician reported, voice tight with tension. "Radiation levels beyond measurement capability." All eyes turned to the video feed from inside the chamber. Jonah floated in the center of the lethal maelstrom, eyes closed, still clutching the water canteen the commander had given him. His body should have been disintegrating, cellular structure collapsing under the onslaught of radiation. Instead, he appeared completely unaffected. No, more than unaffected. As they watched in disbelief, the ambient light in the chamber began to change, taking on a bluish glow that seemed to emanate from Jonah himself. "What's happening?" Solara demanded. "Explain this phenomenon." Before anyone could respond, the radiation sensors throughout the control room began to wail in alarm. The monitoring screens flickered, then went dark one by one. "Impossible," Solara whispered. The control room is shielded against any conceivable—" Her words were cut short as the main power systems failed, plunging the entire level into darkness. Emergency lighting activated, casting everything in a blood-red glow. In the sudden silence that followed, a new sound emerged, a high-pitched whine that rose steadily in intensity, coming from the direction of the null chamber. "Evacuation protocol!" the security wing commander bellowed. "All personnel to emergency transport tubes immediately!" But it was too late. The observation room's reinforced viewing panel suddenly crystallized, fractures spreading across its surface like a web. Then, with a sound like 1,000 glass goblets shattering simultaneously, it exploded inward. The last thing Lieutenant Mira saw before losing consciousness was Captain Jonah Rourke walking, not floating, but walking, through the ruined doorway of the null chamber. His body glowed with that same eerie blue light, and in his hand, he still clutched the water canteen, now crushed into an unrecognizable shape. Mira awoke to the wail of emergency sirens. She lay on the floor of a corridor, several levels above the null chamber, with no memory of how she had gotten there. Around her, other council personnel were similarly regaining consciousness, their confused voices adding to the cacophony of alarms. "What happened?" someone was asking. "How did we get here?" Mira struggled to her feet, fighting a wave of dizziness. Her last clear memory was of Jonah emerging from the null chamber, surrounded by that inexplicable blue glow. Everything after that was fragmented, impressions of movement, of being carried, of a voice saying something she couldn't quite remember. "The human," she gasped. "Where is he?" No one seemed to know. The corridor was filled with scientific staff and security wing personnel, all in various states of confusion. But there was no sign of Captain Jonah Rourke or of Dr. Solara Vex. Ignoring the pain that pulsed behind her eyes, Mira made her way to a functioning terminal and accessed the facility's security systems. What she saw sent a chill through her entire body. The lower levels of the Council Spire, including the Null Chamber, the Bioforge, and all primary research facilities, were in ruins. Security footage showed corridors filled with toxic vapors, laboratories with equipment melted into unrecognizable slag, and throughout it all, fleeting glimpses of a glowing blue figure, moving with deliberate purpose. "He's still in the facility," she realized aloud. "Who is?" asked a voice behind her. Mira turned to find Archivist Cedrin, looking disheveled but largely unharmed. "The human," she replied. "He's free, and he's doing something to the facility." Cedrin's pale face grew even paler. "We must inform the consul immediately." Together, they made their way to the Emergency Command Center, where Consul Ralthus was coordinating the response to what was being called a catastrophic system failure. When Mira explained what she had seen, the consul's scales darkened with alarm. "Impossible," he hissed. "Nothing could survive the null chamber, let alone escape it." "With respect, Consul," Mira replied. "We've been saying impossible since the human arrived. Perhaps it's time to consider that our understanding of possible needs revision." A commotion at the entrance to the command center interrupted their conversation. Security personnel parted to reveal Dr. Solara Vex, being supported by two assistants. Her normally immaculate appearance was in disarray, one of her 4 eyes swollen shut, her skin ashen with shock. "Dr. Vex," Ralthus exclaimed. "What happened? Where is the human specimen?" Solara's remaining eyes focused with difficulty. "Gone," she whispered. "But not before he showed me." "Showed you what?" Mira asked, moving to support her superior. "Everything." Solara's voice strengthened slightly. "He's not what we thought, Lieutenant. None of them are." "Explain yourself, Doctor," Ralthus demanded. Solara straightened, shaking off her assistant's support. "The human, Jonah. He's not a natural specimen. He's engineered. His blood contains modified extremophile DNA sequences. adaptations from dozens of Earth species, combined into a single genome. A bioweapon, Ralthus concluded grimly. No, Solara shook her head. A prototype. Earth's governments were desperate, their planet facing ecological collapse, resource depletion, their own destructive technologies turning against them. They needed a human who could survive. Anything. Mira's mind raced with the implications. That's why our tests failed. We weren't examining natural evolution. We were dealing with deliberate engineering. Worse, Solara continued. The water, the canteen, it contained nanomachines, not like our crude attempts, but something far more sophisticated. When he drank, they bonded with his cellular structure, activated by the radiation in the null chamber. He used our own test protocols to trigger his final adaptation, Mira realized with dawning horror. And then he communicated with me, Solara said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Not with words. He touched my mind somehow, showed me images, feelings. Earth has survived catastrophes we can barely imagine, Lieutenant. And each time, they've adapted, not just biologically, but technologically, socially, psychologically. What does he want? Ralthus demanded. Why hasn't he simply destroyed us if he's as powerful as you suggest? A new voice answered, calm, familiar, yet somehow different than they remembered. Because destruction isn't the point. They turned to find Captain Jonah Rourke standing in the doorway of the command center. He no longer glowed with that eerie blue light, but there was something fundamentally changed about him, a subtle alteration in his posture, his eyes, the very quality of his presence. Security personnel raised their weapons, but Ralthus signaled them to hold. What is the point, then human? Understanding, Jonah replied simply. Isn't that what your council is supposed to be about? Understanding how life adapts to impossible conditions. He walked forward, the guards parting nervously before him. Humans don't want to conquer you, or destroy you. We've had enough of destruction on our own world. What we want is to ensure our survival, and yours, if possible. By infiltrating our most secure facility, Ralthus hissed. By damaging our research capabilities? By demonstrating that your approach is fundamentally flawed, Jonah corrected. You study life by dissecting it, by testing it to destruction. You seek to dominate biology instead of learning from it. He turned to Solara. You saw, didn't you? What humans have endured. What we've become. Solara nodded slowly. They've survived nuclear war, pandemic, climate collapse, and each disaster made them stronger, more adaptable. Not just stronger, Jonah said. More connected, more aware that our survival depends on cooperation, with each other, with our environment, with the countless microorganisms that share our bodies and our world. He addressed the entire room now. Your council studies Deathworlds, but you never ask the most important question. Why does life persist in such hostile environments? The answer isn't in specialized adaptations or evolutionary tricks. It's in relationship, in the countless ways different organisms support each other, communicate with each other, change together. Lieutenant Mira stepped forward. That's what I was trying to tell you. Dr. Solara, humans don't just adapt biologically, they adapt intentionally, collectively. And now, Jonah continued, we're offering that same relationship to the Confederation, not as specimens to be studied, but as partners in survival. Partners? Ralthus repeated skeptically. After you've damaged our most advanced research facility? I only disabled the technologies you were using to harm and dominate, Jonah replied. Your databases, your knowledge, all preserved. But your approach must change. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each council member in turn. Earth is sending diplomatic envoys to formally request admission to your Confederation. They'll arrive within a standard cycle. Before they do, you have a choice to make. Will you continue trying to dominate life, or will you learn to collaborate with it? With that, he turned and walked toward the exit. No one moved to stop him. "Where are you going?" Solara called after him. Jonah paused at the threshold. "Home. My mission here is complete." "Your mission?" Mira asked. "To be studied," he said with that familiar, unsettling smile. "To let you see what humans are, not just through your tests, but through your fear. Sometimes, fear is the only teacher that works." After he had gone, the command center remained silent for several long moments. Finally, Consul Ralthus spoke. "Dr. Vex, Lieutenant Mira, you are the only ones who have directly observed the humans' capabilities. You will prepare a complete report for the full council immediately." Solara nodded, her professional demeanor reasserting itself despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Yes, Consul." As they left the command center, Mira glanced at her superior. "What will you recommend, Chief?" Solara was silent for several steps. Then, with uncharacteristic uncertainty, she said, "I don't know, Lieutenant. For the first time in my career, I find myself humbled. Everything I thought I understood about biology, about adaptation, it's all been challenged." "Perhaps that's not a bad thing," Mira suggested. "Science advances through challenges to establish knowledge." "Perhaps." Solara's 4 eyes, 3 now functional again, focused on the corridor ahead. "But one thing is certain. We cannot study humans as we have studied other species. They are not merely specimens to be dissected." "Then what are they?" Solara's expression hardened with resolve. "A wake-up call, Lieutenant. A reminder that no species, however primitive it might appear, can be fully dominated or understood through force. If the Confederation is to survive an encounter with humanity, we must adopt a new approach, one based on dialogue rather than dissection." "You're proposing interspecies diplomacy instead of xenobiology," Mira realized. "I'm proposing survival," Solara corrected. "The human showed me Earth's history, cycles of catastrophe and adaptation that make even our Deathworld seem tame by comparison. If we attempt to treat humans as we have treated other specimens, we won't be the ones conducting the experiment. We'll be the subjects." High above Zuire 9, in the upper reaches of the grand spire that housed the Deathworld Council, a small transport vessel detached from an emergency docking port. Inside, Captain Jonah Rourke settled into the pilot's seat, his movements precise and economical. The nanomachines that had been activated in the null chamber continued their work, optimizing his cellular structures, enhancing his neural connections. He set a course for the rendezvous point where an Earthship waited in stealth mode, then activated the communication system. "Mission complete," he reported. "The demonstration was effective. They now understand what they're dealing with." "Casualties?" asked a voice from the other end. "None," Jonah replied. "As instructed. I only disabled their weapons and testing apparatus. Their knowledge, their research, preserved." "Good," the voice approved. "The diplomatic team is ready. The first official contact between Earth and the Confederation will proceed as planned." Jonah smiled to himself as the transport accelerated away from Zuire 9. Behind him, the Deathworld Council spire gleamed in the light of the setting sun, not burning as he had initially implied to Mira, but transformed. The Council would never be the same after what they had witnessed, what they had learned about the species they had so casually dismissed as primitive. Sometimes, the most important lesson was the simplest: respect through fear. The Council had screamed, and in their scream, they had finally begun to understand. Humanity was coming to the stars, not as a specimen to be studied, but as a force to be reckoned with, a species forged in the crucible of a death world, tempered by disaster, strengthened by adversity, and above all, determined to survive.